well-rounded genre in the entire medium in terms of storytelling, gameplay, as well as technical advancements. But within the last several decades, the genre of Japanese RPGs has really kind of faded into the background, with Western developers first off closing the gap in terms of storytelling and gameplay, and as well the genre kind of also shot itself in the foot by trying to adapt new styles of gameplay, new storytelling methods that were basically designed to become more casual and attract a wider range of players. But at the same time, what happened is they ended up alienating the most dedicated fan base. So I really can't think of a video game that is more important to its genre than Final Fantasy 15 is to Japanese RPGs. And after a very rocky development cycle of over a decade, the game is finally out. And although it is by far no means a perfect game, it is definitely a game that is well worth your time if you are a fan of the genre, and will hopefully breathe new life into Japanese RPGs as a whole. But more on that following this review. So storytelling has always been a major strength of Japanese RPGs, and Final Fantasy 15 is no exception. So a spoiler-free synopsis of the entire story is that you are a prince trying to recapture his throne by fighting against an opposing empire, but at the same time you're also fighting against this ancient evil that threatens basically the entire world, and that's pretty much it. So overall though, the story is well executed in Final Fantasy 15, and there are legitimate moments that made my eyes swell up just because of how strong and emotional they were. But at the same time, there are some things of the story that I really wish would have been addressed and cleaned up. First being that there is a heavy reliance of you watching the Final Fantasy 15 King's Glaive movie in order to get the full scope of the story. And in my personal opinion, you shouldn't have to access an outside source to get the full scope of a game. If a story is executed perfectly, then you should not need any outside information. The game should be very upfront on what the story is. So that's my first issue with the game. And my second issue is that there are some very important moments, especially at the beginning and at the end of the game, that are left out, and they are just basically touched upon briefly, and they are addressed off screen. And it was probably some of the most infuriating moments that I had with the game, just because I would have liked to see how the game would have executed, and it just made me want a little bit more to have things flushed out a little bit better, especially when you encounter some characters. There are some characters who have significant story moments that aren't really addressed at all, or should have been explored a little bit more to just make it a little bit more satisfying, in my opinion. But overall, the characters are likable. They all seem to fit the narrative of basically a group of friends, a group of guys who are basically trying to travel the world together. They have their bro moments, but at the same time, there are some awkward moments that the game offers up that I really wish should have been. I feel like it just could have used a little bit of more massaging just to make it not as awkward. But what I do like is that a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the backstory of the game is basically addressed through the traveling system or sitting at a campfire together, rather than kind of just the story being pushed directly in your face through like a cinematic event, and you kind of just have to follow along as you go. I feel like this way they kind of presented the story in this game was a little bit more natural than what we have seen thus far in previous Japanese RPGs, and I think it is a really positive step. So yeah, overall I did like the story. It is executed extremely well, and there are some powerful moments, and overall I think I really did enjoy the ending, even though it was a little bit confusing at first, but after I thought about it a little bit more, it all honestly all wrapped together nicely in a neat little package that was basically beautiful and very artistic at the end. So modernizing Japanese RPG gameplay to bring in new players as well as satisfying the old guard has probably been the biggest bane of the entire genre, but Final Fantasy 15 finally executes it well with its awesome battle system that is somewhat of a more refined version of the battle system that you found in Final Fantasy 11. Throughout the entire game, you will only have control of Prince Noctis. You will not at any point take any control of the other three characters that are in your party. For the most part, they do a competent job in dealing out damage. You will have to invest some ability points into their Final Fantasy X-like skill tree and sphere grid in order for them to adequately heal themselves throughout the entire game, especially near the back end of the game. I found since I didn't invest any ability points into the more support traits and support abilities. You are basically babysitting your characters and your other members of your party for a while, so that is something I do recommend that you invest into. But near the back end of the game, you'll find that they do a very poor job in removing status effects such as confusion, poison, and basically you kind of have to the entire time as Prince Noctis basically be playing the role as an active medic. And they also do a very poor job of getting out of the way of magic spells that you want to cast. You can hold the spell for however long you want in your hand, and they will never move away from the enemy, and you're basically gonna have to collateral damage cast the spell and deal as much damage as you can to the enemy and deal with the repercussions of your ally members as well, taking a little bit of the damage. Speaking of magic, if you're a person who likes to play as a spellcaster, you may be a little bit disappointed of how magic is implemented in this game. So basically, the 4 members of your party deal primarily with physical damage through weapons, and how magic is implemented is it's kind of like the Final Fantasy VIII draw system, where you'll find the magical nodes scattered throughout the entire world, more notably around campfires, and you draw through a specific point. The more magic that you draw, and you have to create spells using those nodes, the more amount that you have, the stronger the spell becomes. And basically you can also mix and match, you can also mix them with various items such as high potions to heal as you cast, or other methods to make the spell stronger. And they're basically the only standard elements of Blizzard, Thunder, and Fire. But even though there are limited uses of how many times you can use the magic, when you do use them, they work to a very satisfying effect. They hit very hard, and they actually also can take into account the field in which they use them. For instance, when I fought the Malboro, and we were in a little bit of a lake area, I casted Blizzard, and it froze the entire lake and made everyone stick in the ground for a little while, and all the characters, both enemies and allies, couldn't move for a set amount of time, which was very satisfying. So even though you can't use magic basically as quickly as you want, when you do use it, it is quite effective. My biggest complaint with the gameplay is most definitely its pacing, and I think this is a good indication of the rocky development cycle that this game has had over the last 10 years or so. And so, just for example, I think it's more of a tale of 2 games. That's the best way I can describe it. You spend the first 3/4 of this game in this really big, vast, and beautiful open world where the day-night cycle is constantly changing. You can basically go wherever you want, and there are a ton of distractions to kind of keep you away and keep you tempted from tackling the main quest, lots of side quests, and basically you can go wherever you want. There aren't really any limitations set upon you. At the very beginning of the game, you can, when you're like level 5, you can get attacked by a level 30 enemy right off the bat, and you have to make the decision and be aware that you probably can't tackle this battle right now, but if you want, you can at least try and get absolutely destroyed, and the game allows you to do that. And that, I feel, is something that's very organic, and that's something that is very awesome. But at the 3/4 mark of the game, you eventually get set on this linear path where the story progresses at a very quick and alarming pace. The problem with this is it is a complete 180 of what you played the majority of the game thus far, and what makes it worse is that shortly after the game becomes very linear, it sets you in this dungeon that is an absolute slog to get through. And I'm not going to really spoil it for you for why it's a slog, but it has its moments and it's fun for like the first 15 or 20 minutes, but afterwards it's another hour in this dungeon and you're pretty much stabbing your eyes out, trying and praying that it's eventually going to end. And yeah, it's probably my biggest issue with the gameplay. It's pacing. It's kind of all over the place, and I once again think it's mainly a good indication of how this game has kind of went through this really rocky development cycle, and they're trying to shoehorn these elements that they've already developed and kind of massage them into the game, but it isn't really done that well. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the gameplay in Final Fantasy 15, the awesome battle system, the huge open world that you can explore, and there are 2 specific boss battles that will go down as some of the most epic moments in video game history. They will honestly make your eyes bleed as you play them, and probably will most likely be the highlight for this game for anyone who tries to play it. And it's just awesome, and when you do experience it for yourself, you just, yeah, it's just great. So overall, really awesome gameplay. So when I played the Final Fantasy 15 Episode Duskai demo last year, the technical aspects of this game were probably my biggest concern for it. But a year later, the final product is a night and day difference than that demo, which had frame rate issues as well as really bad aliasing. So the open world is beautiful. The only thing that is kind of plain are the dungeons, both the optional dungeons that you can kind of find when you kind of venture off into the open world in these specific little junctions, or during the time when you're fighting through that very painstaking dungeon that I talked about a little bit earlier during the main storyline. But overall, like I said, the open world is beautiful. It has a very organic feel with its day and night cycle, and I really didn't notice any FPS drops during my entire playthrough. The game ran at a steady 30 throughout the entire time, and the monster designs are highly detailed and they look very organic and very lifelike, and they're just great, especially when you get up close to like a monster such as Behemoth. You can feel the scale of the monster. My own complaints on a technical level are sometimes based on the battle system. There's a high level of movement. You're moving around a lot, teleporting a lot. Sometimes if you're in a little bit of a confined area, you're fighting the camera a little bit where you won't be able to see your character. This only happened in like 3 or 4 instances, so it's not a huge deal, but still worth noting. And probably my biggest issue are the sandwich load times throughout the entire game. When you're fast traveling, and especially if you're between chapters, you can run into some really lengthy load times, up to 2 minutes, which in modern gaming I do find is a little bit unacceptable to wait 2 minutes on a load time. So is Final Fantasy 15 a masterpiece? Absolutely not. There are a lot of clear indications that this game went through a fairly rocky development cycle, especially when you look closer into its pacing of the story as well as the gameplay, but at the same time, it nails everything that you expect to find in RPG right on the head. It executes its story well, and it modernizes its gameplay to attract new players, but at the same time still satisfy old players alike, and I definitely think that it is a journey worth taking.